Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This week's show, we're talking about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Billy the Kid, Season 2, Episode 2. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we have the opening with the sheriff coming to shut down one of Tungstill's businesses. Especially, it comes at the perfect time because Tungstill's away because he's got smallpox. And so there's even this conversation between, was it Riley and Murphy about like, oh, we should go pay him a visit, kind of strike while the iron's hot or kick him while he's down type of situation. But they end up sending Waltz to deal with that, but we'll get to that in a second. So Brewer was talking about like, right, this is a legitimate business. You're working for the house. You're working for Murphy. Like, as the deputy, I have my say in how things can kind of work, but obviously you're a sheriff. Like, the fact of the matter is you're making it seem like you're doing your job, but we know like who you're really backing. And it's just the sheriff's in this really interesting spot because I think he is trying to do his best, and maybe for him it is like, working with Murphy and stuff like that is that they do stay slightly on the legal side of things enough, but it's also like, yeah, you're only doing this because who you answer to is Murphy and all his businesses and stuff like that. But I think it's just, I think even the sheriff, I'm old. I want to keep the peace. I don't want like crap to hit the fan type of situation. And obviously Brewer had to try and defend the horses that were being stolen by Jesse and his gang, and he kind of forced the sheriff's hand. It's like, no, you're going to participate in this. You have to. Because as a deputy, I, by law, can kind of force you to investigate. And even Brewer was kind of taken back when the sheriff was like, yeah, I'm looking into it. He's like, anything? Almost like, Mr. Brewer, anything else you want? He was like, all right. Because, like I said, I think the sheriff, like I said, I think he's just, I am going to do my job. I do uphold this badge. It does mean something. It ain't like I'm just doing this just to kind of be like gargling like Murphy's balls. It's like I do my job. When something is wrong, I will act upon it. But it's not a reliable enough situation to always count on the sheriff. But he does act in this situation, gathers up a posse, and they all go strolling after getting the horses. I love that we had cut back to Tunstall being like, no, you don't understand. I felt like, oh, that's because he like knew it was a trap. It's like, no, because he just didn't want them to engage because he knew that would be an instigation for like a fight. To be fair, their side did pop off first. It was actually one of their shooters. It was the guy they got most recently. He fired the first shot and stuff popped off from there. But obviously, Jesse and the few that were left after the shots were fired had to like surrender, because they were outmatched, outgunned, they were cornered in a house. So, but Brewer was thinking like, oh yeah, this was kind of over. It's like, yeah, but this is the first round, because he knew it wasn't going to be that easy. And it's like, even if Jesse's removed, like we're people like there are plenty, like Jesse is as skilled as he is, but there's plenty of guns for hire who would come work for him. So like he has enough power and reach that Murphy or Mr. Catron in particular, because he's the one kind of really behind the scenes on this, has enough money and pull to make stuff happen. So there's no backing away from it. I didn't realize it till this episode, but Mr. Brewer, I was like, why does he look so familiar? But I was like, I think I recognize him. He played Philip in the show Travelers. I think that's what I recognize him. Because in that show, he's clean shaven. So like, I think his hair's a little darker in this, and he's got a beard. That's why I almost didn't recognize him. Cool science fiction time travel show if you've never seen it before. I think the show was sadly canceled, but I think it still ends off on enough of a note that you could still enjoy it all the way through. But, that's just me. But either way, I'm going on a massive tangent. But yeah, Jesse and his crew were locked up, which I'm like, that's not going to sit. Like, for one, we already had that future moment where Billy's kind of like him. And like I said, I think I can only assume the person, I haven't rewatched the first episode, that opening in particular, but with Tom being with them, I'm like, that's got to be Tom, because that's the person Jesse's going to look after the most. Him and Charlie, because Charlie's the one with an actor, like he's got a child. I mean, that child his wife gave birth to that child this episode, but it's like he's got a family. to speak about. Like, I mean, I think a lot of the other people, probably some of them are farmers, so they probably do have families, but Charlie's the one we focus on the most. Everyone else might actually be on their own, so that might be why Charlie's storyline gets the focus of, he's the family guy. He's got especially because he got a baby on the way, like I said, it's born in this episode, but also a youngin' like Tom, which, you know, Billy sees so much of himself in Tom. It's like, yeah, he had to wander this world, you know, after losing so much, and he's been on his own after losing his family little by little over the years, that it just, you know, he sees too much of himself in someone who's lost and like knows what this world can do to someone that's alone and lost. And it's like, I want to make sure you stay on the straight and narrow. You want to look up to me and listen to me, fine, but you're going to be prepared for what's coming, the ugliness that's coming between this war between Murphy and Tungsto. Which, speaking of Tungsto, got a visit from Edgar Waltz, who made it clear, you either back down and, hey, you sell your business, you even leave town, and you leave Lincoln behind, and it'll be all okie-dory. He even was like, oh, these are your sisters. And I was like, you would assume they wouldn't be able to do nothing because his sisters are back home in England. So you won't think you'd be able to do anything to them, but we don't know how far Katrin's reach is. You wouldn't assume. Like, he seems like he's just like an American businessman. You would assume he wouldn't have that much reach to kill someone in a different country, especially across the pond. But hell, for all we know, maybe he can. But it's like, I mean, that specifically seemed like a threat when it's like, oh, these are your three sisters. They're so pretty, you know. But maybe Tungsto's not too worried about that. Because, like I said, the threat didn't come up because probably it's like getting to his sisters would be nearly impossible. But we can threaten your life. And Tungsto got scared. I mean, hey, that survival instinct comes in where it's like someone threatening you. It's like, oh, I need your answer in the next 24 hours or we'll kill you anyway. So you resist us, you die. But if you sign off on this, you give away, you can end this war, stop any bloodshed, and you get to walk away with a good enough amount of money in your pocket. Granted, you're going to be leaving Lincoln, but you'll be leaving a little wealthier and alive. And it did get to him that, especially when he heard from McSween, like, yeah, the judge okayed everything, but any prosecution or anything would happen within the week. Well, there was two ways to interpret it. I guess the way I initially interpreted it was like, oh, that's not moving fast enough. If it was in the next day, sure. But now it's like, oh, if that's going to be like a week, it's like, well, crap. Like, now would be the time to strike because I have 24 hours to kind of, you know, back out of this. Because the plan was like to sell some of his stuff off to appease him and walk away. But his way of thinking was like, well, there's a third route. I can try and negotiate peace, get Jesse and his boys out, and now be kind of an olive branch to Murphy. But to be fair, once again, it's not even just Murphy you're answering to, it's Katrin. And even then, he'd probably be like, no, I don't, it's too much of a hassle because you've already made too much of a stink that it's like, I'm not going to just let you go. You are going to be a thorn in my side. If I let you go now, it'll be, you know. So, too bad. Tungsto was so controlled by fear, he probably didn't think that far ahead. But I'm sure, like, I mean, once again, Murphy's kind of a mouthpiece. He's his own person, but I still feel like he's still a mouthpiece for Riley and Katrin, specifically Katrin, because even Riley's a mouthpiece for Katrin himself. So it is kind of like hand up Riley's ass, who has his hands up Murphy's ass, you know. And Murphy kind of speaks for Jesse, but Jesse's still kind of doing his own thing because the money's good and he loves being an outlaw and being a rogue, so. But yeah, Tungsto has this plan of like, this is what he's going to do, which Billy's there being like, don't do this. Like, I know Jesse, it's not going to go the way you want, but it's like, hey, you work for me, I give you a second chance. You're not just going to let that go to waste, are you? So when I ask you to do something, you're going to do it. It's like, okay, sure, Tungsto. And so make a deal with the sheriff, which once again, he kind of takes off the payment, and it's that thing kind of going back to what Brewer was talking about before. And even I was, like I said earlier, as long as it keeps the peace, he's fine with it. So it's like, all right, you're doing this, you're even sweetening the deal by not only giving me money, even promising me that this will de-escalate things. So it's like, it's a win-win. Hey, I get a little extra cash on the side. Plus, you know, once again, I don't have to be too worried about anything expediting. So when the time comes, they're able to break Jesse and his crew out. And yeah, this is supposed to begin in beginning stages of like, yeah, negotiations. But then Jesse and his crew pull out the guns and like, no, we're not going to do that because this ain't going to just be some war. It's like, cool. Whereas we could have at least hampered Katrin / Murphy, we've put their best gunners back out there because Billy knows out of anyone, for one, Jesse's never going to quit, but also he's the best out of anyone in that crew. And for one, also, Billy doesn't want to be in a position where he has to kill Jesse. There's so much complicated history there that was your best friend, that's your brother, you know? And it's like, you don't want things to come down to it. That's why when it was all said and done, it's like, hey, Jesse, you're surrounded, give up. Like, he wanted him to give up because he didn't want him to turn this into a firefight. Because it's like, right, you're surrounded. As good as you are, you'll take a couple of us down, but you won't, there's no guarantee you're going to come out of this alive. And I was like, cool. He got the drop on us, and now it was all for nothing. It literally was for nothing. And Tungsten was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. I let my fear get the best of me. But you stood fast. You told me kind of what was going on. And so I got my courage back this time. But it's like, Billy's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, you need to listen to me if we're going to win this war. So, and the sad thing too is like, because we got that scene with Charlie's child being born, his son, he's like, oh, if it's okay with you, I want to name this kid Billy. And it's like, and his wife is like, I'm scared. And he's like, no, it's gonna be okay. And he goes outside and kind of breaks down in the ground because he doesn't want to, if she sees him, he has to stay strong for her, so, and this child. But he knows what this means. Like, when this war is coming, there's no guarantee he's coming out of this alive. And she was so scared about that because she's like, I don't want you to die. I don't want to lose you. I know our son doesn't need to grow up without a father. And that was even something Billy was trying to make a point of, like, you don't have to be in this. Like, you are a father, soon to be father, and he isn't one now. And just, there's no backing out of this. The flags have been waved, and it's time for war. There's no backing out of this. They have to make this fight. It's do or die, because there's no backing out of this at this point. For one, they believe they're on the right side of things with Tunstall. My faith in Tunstall kind of got shaken this episode. I'm like, when you see like the way he handles stuff, I'm like, maybe he's not as bad as Murphy, but it just feels like he's not the good option. He's the lesser of two evils, it feels like. When, like I said, it's just, he seemed like a reasonable and good enough person up until now, but it's like, the fact is that his morals can be shaken so easily. Once again, we're all humans. Like, fear can get the best of us, but it just makes me go, are you, not necessarily saying like, oh my God, you abandoned him. I still think in Billy's eyes, it's like, he's still a good man. He had to shake, his faith was shaken, but it's like, yeah, he's down for it. But I'm like, yeah, but he didn't do that for your sake. He'll probably justify, like, oh, I'm trying to end a war. That way no sides get hurt. We could do a lot of good business together, me and Murphy. We could put a lot of our BS aside. But the problem is, it's like, yeah, but you were doing that because your life was threatened. It wasn't even about everyone else. It was about your life. Your self-interest took precedent. And who's to say that won't happen again? Because self-preservation it's part of the human instinct. So we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, Billy's got his own complications. He goes off to see Dulcinea, and it turns out the person she was with last episode, that was her brother. She still is engaged to be married. I mean, obviously, this is someone that was arranged for her when she was a little girl. And, Billy believes, like, no, like, you should be able to, no one should have to be, like, having arranged marriage. Like, you should be able to marry whoever you want to. And so he meets her dad, and obviously he sees Billy as, well, Billy the Kid instead of William. And it's like, yeah, the outlaw. And it's like, well, the former outlaw. And obviously probably wasn't expecting Billy to know Spanish. So I'm sure that, because like everything he was saying between him and Dulcinea, I'm sure Dulcinea knows he can speak Spanish, right? I'm sure she does, but she probably never told her dad that he could. So, because I'm pretty sure he's talked to her in Spanish beforehand. Like the little like Spanglish he's kind of mixed in here and there, like, but like full on Spanish. I mean, obviously we know that he's known some because his buddy, who was like a brother to him, he was around him a lot growing up and learned a lot of Spanish then. But either way, tangents and all that aside, there was this interesting conversation they had about, because it was like, oh, are you a man of faith? And Billy's like, yeah, but with all the things I've seen, like, no one would have faith. And I thought it was so interesting. He was like, oh, yeah, I had the same buddy. Something terrible happened to him. He never believed in God until the very end. I went to see him on his deathbed, and he was like, do you still not believe in God? And he's like, are you still an atheist? He's like, yes, I'm an atheist. Thank God. I was like, I really like that. I mean, because a lot of people are. It's just kind of like, I mean, there's multiple ways you can interpret that. It's just kind of like, yes, everyone finds religion when the time has come, That we can be selfish like that, where it's like, oh, when the time comes, it's like, we live our lives not necessarily that we're mortal, we're aware of death, but a lot of times it is just a situation of it's so far off we don't think about it, so we're not going to get caught up in religion. But then it's like, oh, and especially when something once again can shake your faith and make you not want to believe, that's enough to kind of really sting and kind of change you off that path. And it could just be a situation of, on your deathbed you're like, right, I want to make good with the Lord, because I want there to be something else when I go off. Will there be a bright light waiting for me, or is it just pure darkness? You want to believe in that there being something like an afterlife. But maybe it could also be interpreted as a thank God, because I am an atheist, because maybe it's just you can interpret it as like a thankful to be wrong in the end, or just being like, oh, thank God allowing me to be an atheist, that I lived long enough to continue being an atheist until I'm like joined in God's sweet, sweet embrace at the end. Once again, there's many ways to interpret that. At least that's my ways of seeing like the different ways you can interpret it. But they also had this really interesting conversation about, like, right, both of them being immigrants and how this country doesn't treat immigrants great. It can be harder on the immigrants the most. And there's this conversation about, like, when people come here, when it means to become an American. Like, here in America kind of abandons a lot of traditions, which for Billy, he agrees with that in some capacities and doesn't in others. But one of the things he believes in when it comes to the Americans is like believing that someone should marry someone they want to. They should be able to choose who they marry. That choice shouldn't be made for them. And that really struck a chord with Dulcinea's father, especially because he was in an arranged marriage situation. He was exactly in his daughter's circumstance. He loved someone else and grew to love his wife, sure, but and it was the young love. It's like, I eventually forgot. But at the end of the day, what was kind of done to me and your mom was wrong. Like, you are grown. You have every right to marry the person you love, because Billy made it clear of like, oh, I want to marry Dulcinea. And once again, I'm not well versed enough in Billy's story, but like, obviously I'm assuming that doesn't work out. I mean, I don't think he was married, but maybe he was shortly married, because we don't know what happened to his SO. Like, maybe she died, or just like considering what his life is and who he becomes and who he is now, but who he will become in the future, doesn't really allow for a life of kind of, having someone by your side for long periods of time. Either the love comes and goes in the way of, they're gone permanently out of your life because they died, or just things don't work out. We'll see how it all plays out. Obviously, in general, we know Billy's Billy's story doesn't have a happy ending. When you're an outlaw in the Western times, it rarely does. Your story's always going to end in a hell of bullets, maybe. But it's like, the question then becomes like, because this is all about not the destination, but the journey. Who you meet along the way, the hearts and minds and people you've touched, the journey he's on of, I don't want to just be an outlaw. I wanted this second chance that Tunstall gave me. That's also why he also stayed with Tunstall, because it's like, regardless of it all, you gave me a second chance to be the man my mom always wanted me to be. But, sadly, we know that won't be the case. That's still, because we don't know what kind of outlaw he's going to be portrayed as, because once again, I'm not well versed in Billy. I read tiny bits and pieces about Billy, but once again, we're talking about fiction. It's going to probably play true to some historical accuracy, but it's also like, right, you're going to take certain liberties with it. So we never know what kind of outlaw he's going to be. He could be more anti-hero outlaw as Billy the Kid, as he's kind of been up to this time. Like, it's you screwed him over. Like, it's usually a self-defense situation. There have been straight up murder situations, sure, but I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Interesting to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.